Welcome to this deep dive into one of the most significant moments in all of Tolkien's legendarium, the creation of the Silmarils. These three jewels are not just beautiful objects, they're central to the entire narrative of the Silmarillion, and their theft by Morgoth triggered the War of the Jewels. Today we're going to explore everything about these legendary gems, what they were made of, how Fëanor created them, why they mattered so much, and how they shaped the entire history of the First Age and beyond. We'll examine the cultural and cosmological context of their creation, the technical mastery required to forge them, and the terrible consequences that followed. The Silmarils were three gems of immense beauty, created by Fëanor in Aman during the years of the Trees of the First Age. But to understand their significance, we need to understand the world they were created in, a world lit not by the sun and moon, but by two immense and sacred trees. Before the Silmarils, before even the concept of capturing light in a jewel could exist, there were the Two Trees of Valinor. Understanding these trees is essential to understanding what the Silmarils truly were. The first sources of light for all of Arda were two enormous lamps, Iluin, the silver one to the north, and Ormul, the golden one to the south. These were cast down and destroyed by Melkor. After this catastrophe, the Valar went to Valinor, and Yavanna sang into existence the two trees, silver Telperion and golden Laurelin. Telperion was considered male. The trees sat on the hill Ezelohar, located just outside the western gates of Valimar. They grew in the presence of all of the Valar, watered by the tears of Nienna. The physical description of Telperion is remarkable. One had leaves of dark green that beneath were as shining silver, and from each of his countless flowers a dew of silver light was ever falling, and the earth beneath was dappled with the shadow of his fluttering leaves. This wasn't merely decorative. The dews of Telperion and the rain that fell from Laurelin Varda hoarded, and these liquid forms of light would become important later. Telperion was also named Silpion and Ninquelote, among other names. The silver light it gave was compared to moonlight, but it was something far more significant. It was primordial light, the illumination of the blessed realm itself. Laurelin was considered female and formed the complementary pair with Telperion. The other bore leaves of a young green like the new opened beech. Their edges were of glittering gold. Flowers swung upon her branches in clusters of yellow flame, formed each to a glowing horn that spilled a golden rain upon the ground. And from the blossom of that tree there came forth warmth and a great light. Laurelin was also given the names of Malinalda and Kulurian. Where Telperion's light was cool and silver, Laurelin's was warm and golden, comparable to sunlight but predating the sun by ages. The trees didn't shine constantly. At the 6th hour of the first day and of all the joyful days thereafter, until the darkening of Valinor, Telperion ceased his time of flower, and at the 12th hour, Laurelin her blossoming. And each day of the Valar in Aman contained 12 hours, and ended with the second mingling of the lights, in which Laurelin was waning, but Telperion was waxing. This is crucial to understand. Each tree of Valinor was ensnared in an eternal cycle of flourishing and shining bright for 7 hours and then slowly waning again. However, the two trees took altered turns in their cycles. Therefore, Valinor started to count time by the passage of days, with each day lasting 12 hours. For a full hour at dusk and another full hour at dawn, both trees were shining together, spreading both silver and gold light in the lands of the Valar. These periods, when both trees shone together, were called the mingling of the lights, and they were considered especially blessed times. It was during these minglings that the light was most complete, most perfect, containing both silver and gold in harmony. The Two Trees of Valinor existed at a time when the only other sources of light were the stars, which had been created for the elves' benefit by Varda from the dews collected from the two trees. This meant that for the elves living in Middle-earth, only starlight illuminated their world, while those who had made the great journey to Valinor lived under the blessed radiance of the trees. In particular, Thingol seems to have been motivated in the great journey by his desire to see the light of Valinor again, until he found contentment in the light he saw in Melion's face. Also in later times, the elves would be divided between the Calaquendi who had seen the light of the trees and the Moriquendi who had not, with the former group explicitly superior in many ways. This division between the Calaquendi, elves of the light, and Moriquendi, elves of darkness, was not merely descriptive. It represented a fundamental difference in the nature and development of elvish peoples. Those who had dwelt in the light of the trees were changed by it, elevated by it, in ways that affected their wisdom, power, and very being. To understand the Silmarils, we must understand their creator. Born in YT 1169, Fëanor was the eldest son of Finwë, the first king of the Noldor, and his first wife, Míriel Térinde. But Fëanor's birth was unprecedented and tragic. In YT 1169, Míriel bore a son called Finwë. whom she called Fëanor, spirit of fire. After giving birth to him, she could no longer live, and so wished to die, something which was impossible because, as an elf, she was immortal within Arda. In YT 1170, she laid down in his gardens where her Fëa peacefully departed from her body, and she entered the halls of Mandos, freely losing her will to continue live in the mortal world. This was shocking and unprecedented. The death of Miriel Perinda, death of an immortal elder in the deathless land of Aman, was a matter of grave anxiety to the Valar, the first presage of the shadow that was to fall on Valinor. Tolkien mentioned in a letter a strange case of an elf, Miriel, mother of Fëanor, that tried to die, which had disastrous results, leading to the fall of the High Elves. Why did Miriel die? Fëanor was born during the years of the trees in Valinor to Finwë and Miriel. He drew so much of Miriel's life energy when he was born that she grew weary of living, and her spirit voluntarily left her body, leaving her family for the halls of Mandos. The implication was clear. Fëanor was so exceptional, his spirit so powerful, that his very creation exhausted his mother beyond recovery. Miriel's hair was described as being silver in appearance, an unusual color for one of the Noldor, and she was highly skilled in the art of weaving and needlework, and thus her Amiless, mother name, was Therinda, the broideress. This skill in craft would be inherited by her son. Fëanor was originally named Finwë, skillful son of Finwë, in Tolkien's fictional language of Quenya. He is known as Fëanor, spirit of fire in Quenya, from Fëa, spirit, and Nar, flame. This mother name proved prophetic. Everything about Fëanor would burn with an intensity beyond that of other elves. Miriel's death created a crisis for the Valar and for elvish lore. Finwë, the first king of the Noldor, and his wife Miriel Therinda had their first child, Fëanor. Unfortunately, the strain of bearing Fëanor caused Miriel to become weary and die. She left her body and went to the halls of Mandos. For a while, Finwë was patient with her, but eventually he became deeply saddened by her absence. He also wished to have more children. Miriel continually refused to return to life, however, so Finwë went to the Valar for their wisdom and counsel. Finwë's petition proved very difficult to aid, because the Valar knew that it was against the design of Ilúvatar for the elves to marry more than once. After much debate, the Valar made the statute regarding the severance of marriage among the elder in the case of Finwë and Miriel, and after a great debate, it was proclaimed by Mandos from the Doom Hill. The statute established that when the spirit of a spouse, husband or wife, shall for any cause pass into the keeping of Mandos, then the living may be permitted lawfully to take another spouse, if the former union be dissolved forever. This allowed Finwë to remarry. Finwë married Indis of the Vanya, and with his second wife Indis had two more sons, Fëanor's half-brothers Fingolfin and Finarfin, and two daughters, Findis and Irime. This would create lasting resentment in Fëanor, who never accepted his half-siblings as true kin. Fëanor was said to be the mightiest in all parts of body and mind, countenance, understanding, skill, and subtlety of all the children of Ilúvatar. However, his personality was riddled with flaws, foremost among them selfishness and pride, which would lead to his own downfall and bring much anguish to his people. Being the greatest of the Noldor, and indeed of all elves, he had the greatest skill of word and hand, was a renowned craftsman, gemsmith, and warrior. Among his achievements before the Silmarils were the creation of the Tengwa script, the Palantir seeing stones, and numerous other works. Fëanor married Nerdanil, daughter of Martin the smith, and they had 7 sons: Maedhros, Maglor, Celegorm, Caranther, Curufin, father of Celebrimbor, Amrod, and Amras. Each would play a role in the tragedy to come. What drove Fëanor to create the Silmarils? It began with observation and wonder. Living in Tirion under the light of the Two Trees, Fëanor became fascinated by light itself, its properties, its effects, how it interacted with different materials. He studied crystals and gems, learning how they could capture, refract, and reflect light. He observed the trees through their cycles, noting how the silver of Telperion differed from the gold of Lorelin, and especially how the two lights mingled during the hours of dusk and dawn. Fëanor was not content merely to observe. He wanted to preserve, to capture, to make permanent what was by nature transient. The light of the trees waxed and waned in endless cycle, but what if it could be held, preserved forever in crystalline form? The shells of the gems were crafted of the hard crystalline substance Silima, which Fëanor had devised, and they were named after it. This material was Fëanor's own invention. They were crafted of a crystalline substance named Silima, and contained some of the light from the Two Trees of Valinor themselves. Silmaril was not a naturally occurring substance. It was created through some combination of Fëanor's deep understanding of matter and his ability to shape reality through craft and will. The substance Fëanor used to create the Silmarils was so resistant that no weapon in Arda could even scratch their surface, and only the most powerful of the Valar would be able to break them. Fëanor created the Silmarils between the years 1449 and 1450 of the First Age, during the noontide of Valinor. The actual process of creating them combined technical mastery with what might be called magical or spiritual power, though for the Elder, these were not separate categories. To make them, Fëanor captured some of the intermingled light from the Two Trees of Valinor and by unknown means contained it, imperishable, into 3 large diamond-like gems. This phrase, by unknown means, is significant. Their exact nature and the manner of their making were known only to Fëanor, and none other succeeded in making gems of comparable greatness and beauty. Some details are known. In the Book of Lost Tales, Fëanor takes opals from the seas and bathed them in phosphorescence and the radiant dew of Silpion, Telperion the silver tree, and but a single tiny drop of the light of Laurelin, the golden tree, did he let fall therein. While this early version differs from the final conception, it suggests that Fëanor worked with the actual dew and rain from the trees, the liquid light that Vardar had been collecting. The Silmarils themselves are said to produce their own light, which comes from the Two Trees, but also to reflect the light of any other lights that come near them. They weren't simple containers or prisons for light, they were living vessels that enhanced and perfected the light they held. The 3 Silmarils are in some sense both alive and sacred. How Fëanor, admittedly the greatest of the Noldor, was able to create these objects is not fully explained. Even the Valar, including Ole, the master in hand skills indeed, could not copy them. In fact, even Fëanor may not have been able to copy them as part of his essence went into their making. This is crucial. Fëanor put part of himself into the Silmarils. They contained not just the light of the trees, but something of his own spirit, his own fire. This made them literally irreplaceable. Once made, they could never be made again, even by their creator. Why 3? The number 3 held deep significance in Tolkien's cosmology, recurring throughout the mythology. Fëanor created 3 Silmarils, each perfect, each containing the mingled light of both Telperion and Laurelin. Their worth in Tolkien's universe was close to infinite, even to the Valar, as they were unique and irreplaceable. The Silmarils were more beautiful than anything that had been made before. Fëanor made the Silmarils of the blended light of the trees of Valinor, which lives in them yet, though the trees have long withered and shine no more. When they were complete, they shone with their own radiance, illuminating everything around them with a light that seemed to contain all the beauty and holiness of Valinor itself. When Fëanor revealed his completed work, even the Valar were amazed. Vardar hallowed the Silmarils so that no mortal or evil hands could touch them without being burned and withered. This blessing by Vardar, Queen of the Valar and Kindler of the Stars, transformed the Silmarils from peerless jewels into sacred objects. The Silmarils were hallowed by Vardar, so that they would burn the hands of any evil creature or mortal who touched them, with the exception of Beren. The Silmarils became in effect moral judges made manifest. They could discern the intent and the deeds of anyone who touched them and would burn those who came to them with evil in their hearts or blood on their hands. This would have terrible consequences later, not just for Morgoth who stole them, but for Fëanor's own sons who swore terrible oaths in pursuit of them. His creations garnered him great praise, and he came to prize the Silmarils above all else. The Noldor celebrated them as the greatest achievement of their people, proof that the children of Ilúvatar could create beauty to rival the works of the Valar themselves. As time went on, however, he began to covet the gems with a greedy love, and he increasingly ignored the fact that the light which lay in the gems and gave them their beauty was not of his own making. This was the beginning of Fëanor's fall, not that he loved his creations, which was natural, but that his love became possessive, jealous, and ultimately destructive. Fëanor alternated between vainly displaying the jewels and jealously guarding them from all but his immediate family, though eventually he came to the point where they almost always remained under lock and key. What began as pride in his achievement gradually transformed into paranoid possessiveness. After 3 ages of imprisonment, Melkor was released by the Valar. After 3 ages of imprisonment, Melkor, mightiest of the Valar and the world's primordial source of evil, deceived his fellows with a false show of repentance. Though he claimed to be reformed, Melkor immediately began sowing discord among the Noldor. Melkor was drawn to the Silmarils with a desire that went beyond mere greed. They represented everything he was not. They were light, and he was devoted to darkness. They were beautiful, and he could only corrupt and destroy. They were created, and he could not truly create. Moreover, they contained the light of the two trees, which Melkor hated above all things. Fëanor became increasingly possessive of his Silmarils, and paranoid that others would attempt to seize them. These concerns were fueled and stoked by the renegade Valar Morgoth, who sought to breed division among the elves. Melkor's lies were subtle. He suggested to Fëanor that the Valar were jealous of his achievement, that they might try to take the Silmarils for themselves. He played on Fëanor's resentment of his half-brothers, suggesting they coveted both his father's throne and his treasures. The situation deteriorated. Fëanor angrily warns Fingolfin not to spread lies and threatens to kill him. As punishment, the Valar exile Fëanor to his remote home, Formenos, for 12 years. Finwë too withdraws to Formenos. This was unprecedented. Violence was unknown in Valinor, and for one of the Noldor to threaten another with a weapon shocked the entire realm. Fëanor was the first of the Eldar to be judged and punished by the Valar. At Formenos, Fëanor kept the Silmarils in a locked chamber. After Fëanor was exiled to Formenos, the Silmarils were stored in a chamber of iron. They were guarded constantly, protected jealously, but ironically this very isolation would make them more vulnerable to the catastrophe that was coming. The Valar learn that Melkor is manipulating Fëanor, and send one of their number, Tulkas, to capture Melkor, but he has already escaped. Melkor had fled Valinor entirely, seeking an ally powerful and evil enough to help him accomplish his plans. Jealous, Melkor enlisted the help of the giant spider creature Ungoliant, the mother of Shelob, to destroy the two trees. Concealed in unlight, Melkor struck each tree with a spear, and the insatiable Ungoliant devoured whatever life and light remained in them. The destruction occurred during a great festival when the Valar and most of the Eldar were gathered on Tanicatil, the mountain of Manwë. The two trees stood relatively unguarded. Melkor strikes each tree with a spear, and the insatiable Ungoliant devours whatever life and light remains in it. The trees died, their sap spilled like blood, and Ungoliant drank it, her vast spider form swelling grotesquely as she consumed the light that had illuminated Valinor since its founding. A darkness fell across the blessed realm, not merely the absence of light, but a thick, oppressive shadow woven from Ungoliant's malice. Yavanna and Nienna attempt a healing, but they succeed only in reviving Telperion's last flower to become the moon, and Laurelin's last fruit to become the sun. Even the combined power of Yavanna, who had originally sung the trees into existence, and Nienna, the Valar of healing and mercy, could not restore them fully. But there was one hope. The Silmarils now contained all the remaining light of the two trees. Therefore, the Valar entreated Fëanor to give up the Silmarils so they could restore the trees. This was the moment that defined Fëanor and shaped all that followed. If he had consented, if he had willingly given up the Silmarils to restore the trees, the entire history of Middle-earth would have been different. The Valar could have revived the trees, Valinor would have been re-illuminated, and the shadow would have been lifted, but Fëanor refused. Before Fëanor could even fully respond to the Valar's request, terrible news arrived. Then news came. Melkor had killed Fëanor's father Finwë, the High King of the Noldor, and stolen all the gems, including the Silmarils. Finwë is the first person to be murdered in Valinor. He is killed by the Dark Lord Morgoth, who is intent on stealing the Silmarils. The High King of the Noldor struck down in his own stronghold while trying to defend his son's treasures. This was the first murder in Valinor, the first violent death in the Deathless Lands. After this deed, Melkor fled to the Northlands of Middle-earth, to his ancient fortress of Angband. Melkor, now named Morgoth by Fëanor, set the Silmarils in his iron crown. Fëanor gave Melkor a new name in that moment, Morgoth, the black foe of the world, the dark enemy. The name stuck. Melkor would ever after be known as Morgoth. Fëanor was furious at Melkor and at the Valar's perceived desire to take the gems for their own purposes. In his rage and grief, Fëanor saw everything through a lens of betrayal. His father was dead, his greatest work stolen, and it seemed to him that even the Valar had wanted to take the Silmarils from him. In anger, he and his 7 sons swore an oath known as the Oath of Fëanor, declaring that they would wage war against any being that withheld a Silmaril from them. The oath was absolute and terrible. It bound Fëanor and his sons to pursue the Silmarils to the ends of the earth, to wage war against anyone, Valar, elf, man, or any other being who kept a Silmaril from them. The words of the oath have been preserved in multiple versions. One version declares, "Be he foe or friend, be he foul or clean, brood of Morgoth or bright Valar, elder or Maiar or aftercomer. Neither law nor love nor league of swords, dread nor danger, not doom itself, shall defend him from Fëanaro and Fëanaro's kin, whoso hideth or hoardeth a Silmaril." This oath would prove more destructive than even Morgoth's original theft. It would drive Fëanor and his sons to commit terrible deeds, to war against their own kin, to refuse mercy and compassion in their single-minded pursuit of the jewels. Fëanor's response to the theft and his father's murder was immediate and devastating. He gathered the Noldor and delivered a great speech, inflaming them with his own rage and grief. He spoke of Morgoth's evil, of the glory of Middle-earth lying in darkness, of the chance to rule as kings and queens over wide realms. The oath commands Fëanor and his sons to press to Middle-earth, in the process committing atrocities against their fellow elves, the first kinslaying, at the havens of the Teleri. The Teleri, the sea elves, possessed ships, and Fëanor demanded them for his journey. When the Teleri refused, Fëanor and his followers took the ships by force, killing many of their kindred in the process. This was the first kinslaying, the first time elf had slain elf. It stained the Noldor's departure from Valinor with blood and set a precedent for the tragedies to come. In Angband, his fortress in the north of Middle-earth, Morgoth set the 3 Silmarils in his iron crown. He wore them as a king wears a crown, but they gave him no peace. Vardar hallowed the Silmarils so that no mortal or evil hands could touch them without being burned and withered. Morgoth's hands were burned black by the Silmarils, and they remained scarred forever. The jewels that he had so desperately desired brought him constant pain. He could not bear to remove them, for his possessive greed was too great, but neither could he touch them without agony. He became a prisoner of his own desire, his hands blackened and withered, unable even to leave his throne for fear of losing the jewels. The pursuit of the Silmarils drove the entire narrative of the First Age. Fëanor led many of the Noldor back to Middle-earth. His flight, which occurred during the First Age of Middle-earth, led to no end of grief for the elves and eventually for the men of Middle-earth. 5 major battles were fought in Beleriand, but ultimately the Noldor and all the people who took the oath failed in their attempt to regain the Silmarils from Morgoth. Fëanor himself died in the first battle against Morgoth, struck down by Balrogs. His most famous deed was the creation of the Silmarils, whose theft made him lead his people to the exile. As the leader of the rebellion, his passionate hatred of Morgoth and terrible oath led directly to the great triumphs and tragedies of the First Age. But the oath lived on through his sons. Maedhros, Maglor, Telegorm, Caranther, Curufin, Amrod, and Amras continued their father's quest, and the oath drove them to increasingly terrible deeds. Beren, son of Barahir, cut a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown as the bride price for Luthien, daughter of the elf king Thingol and Melian the Maya. This tale is considered by many to be the heart of the Silmarillion, and Tolkien himself regarded it as central to his entire legendarium. The story begins with Beren following the Dagor Bragolach, Battle of Sudden Flame, when his father Barahir and his companions continued to defend their land, Dorthonion. Through betrayal, all of Barahir's company was slain except Beren, who was away on a dangerous errand at the time. In FA 464 at midsummer, Beren came into Doriath and chanced upon Luthien, daughter of Thingol, king of Doriath, and Melian the Maya, dancing in the woods of Neldoreth. Their love was immediate and profound, but when Thingol learned of it, he was displeased. Thingol refused to give Luthien's hand in marriage, as Beren was a mortal. He charged Beren that he would allow the marriage to take place only if he brought back a Silmaril from the Iron Crown of Morgoth. This task was intended to be impossible, a death sentence disguised as a quest. Indeed, desiring his death, Thingol set upon him the nigh hopeless task. But Beren accepted. Beren laughed, accepting the quest and setting off at once. He sought out Finrod Felagund, who owed a debt to Beren's father Barahir for saving his life. Finrod, recalling his vow to the kin of Barahir, gathered together a band of his most loyal chieftains. Departing from Nargothrond, Felagund used his craft to disguise the group as a pack of orcs. And so they hoped to pass by Tolin Gaurhoth unnoticed. But they were discovered by Sauron, who at this time was Morgoth's lieutenant and held the fortress of Tolin Gaurhoth. Sauron stripped them of their disguise, but he was unable to learn their names or purpose. So he imprisoned them in a deep pit. Every so often a werewolf would come and devour one of the companions, but all of them were faithful. Eventually, one by one were slain, until only Felagund and Beren remained. When the wolf came for Beren, Finrod broke his chains and fought the beast with his bare hands, killing it, but dying in the process. Luthien, learning of Beren's imprisonment, came to rescue him with the help of Huan, the great hound of Valinor, who had been given to Celegorm. Luthien's song has the power to break prison walls, demonstrating the creative force of music in Middle-earth. With Huan's aid, she defeated Sauron and freed Beren. Near Doriath, they were ambushed by Celegorm and Curufin, who knew of Beren's intentions. to wrest a Silmaril from Morgoth. Curufin swept Luthien up, but Beren leapt into his saddle, and all fell to the ground. In this confrontation, Beren obtained the knife Angrist from Curufin. Beren left Luthien sleeping in the care of Huan and continued his quest. However, Luthien found him singing the Song of Parting at the borders of Anfauglith. Huan counseled that their fates were now bound together, and they continued to Angband together. Using Luthien's powers to place Morgoth's court into a deep sleep, they were able to enter Angband, where Beren cut a Silmaril from the iron crown of Morgoth. The knife Angrist was crucial to this achievement. It was able to cut through the iron of Morgoth's crown. But as they tried to escape, disaster struck. As they escaped from Angband, the great wolf Carcharoth, whom Morgoth had personally bred, awoke. Beren held out the Silmaril, hoping that its radiance would avert the beast. But he was mistaken. Carcharoth bit off his hand, swallowed it, and the Silmaril, thus Beren was called Erkemion, one hand. The fangs of Carcharoth were laced with venom, and death approached Beren. But Thorondor came with his eagles to the aid of Beren and Luthien, and bore the two away from the reach of Morgoth. When he presented himself to Thingol, he proclaimed to the Elven King that he even now had a Silmaril in his hand. When Thingol demanded that Beren present the jewel, he held forth the stump of his hand. This literal fulfillment of his promise, he had a Silmaril in his hand, even though that hand was no longer attached to his body, satisfied Thingol's demand. Carcharoth, maddened by the Silmaril burning inside him, rampaged through Doriath. A hunting party was assembled, consisting of Huan, Mablung, Beleg, Beren, and Thingol. The wolf leapt for Thingol, but Beren came between them, suffering a deadly wound. Huan slew Carcharoth, but was himself fatally injured. Mablung ripped open the wolf and placed the Silmaril in Beren's living hand, who asked Thingol to receive it. "Now the quest is achieved, and my doom full wrought," he said. Beren died from his wounds. Luthien's love for Beren was so strong that, upon hearing of his death, she lay down and died. Her soul went to the halls of Mandos, where she managed to charm Mandos into granting her a wish. Both she and Beren were miraculously restored to life, but both of them would live as mortals and die the death of men and go beyond the walls of Arda to a place unknown. This was unprecedented. Mandos had never before allowed anyone to return from death, and Luthien's choice to become mortal for love represented a sacrifice as profound as any in Tolkien's mythology. Beren and Luthien returned to Middle-earth and lived in Tol Galen in Ossirian, keeping the Silmaril with them. Luthien bore Beren a son named Dior, Thingol's heir, considered to be one of the fairest beings to ever live. For in him flowed the blood of men, of elves, and of the Ainur. Though beautiful, the Silmaril seemed to exude a heavy holiness. Beren is able to hold it without getting burned, yet it burns Carcharoth from the inside. This demonstrates that Beren, though mortal, was worthy to bear the Silmaril. Varda's blessing recognized the purity of his intent. The quest of Beren and Luthien proved that the supposedly impossible task of reclaiming a Silmaril from Morgoth could be achieved, not through armies and force, but through love, courage, and sacrifice. Their success would inspire hope throughout Middle-earth, though it would also reignite the oath of Fëanor with terrible consequences. After Thingol was slain by the dwarves who coveted the Nauglamir, Dior became king of Doriath as Thingol's only heir apparent. Beren and a host of green elves waylaid the returning dwarves at the river Askar in the Battle of San Athrad and recovered the Nauglamir. After Beren and Luthien died, a lord of the Green Elves came to Menegroth bearing a coffer containing the Nauglamir with the Silmaril. Dior arose and clasped the Nauglamir about his neck and appeared as the fairest of all the children of the world, of threefold race, of the Edain, and of the Elder, and of the Maiar. The rumor traveled among the scattered elves of Beleriand. A Silmaril of Fëanor burns again in the woods of Doriath. When this news reached the sons of Fëanor, their oath was awakened once more. Maedhros drafted a letter to Dior demanding the return of the Silmaril. Dior tossed the letter away without even bothering to respond. This refusal sealed Doriath's fate. The sons of Fëanor came at unawares in the middle of winter and fought with Dior in the Thousand Caves, and so befell the second slaying of elf by elf. There fell Celegorm by Dior's hand, and there fell Curufin and dark Caranthir, but Dior was slain also, and Nimloth his wife. The cruel servants of Celegorm seized Dior's young sons, Elurid and Elurin, and left them to starve in the forest. Of this Maedhros indeed repented, and sought for them long in the woods of Doriath. But his search was unavailing, and of the fate of Elurid and Elurin no tale tells. Doriath was destroyed and never rose again. But the sons of Fëanor gained not what they sought, for a remnant of the people fled before them, and with them was Elwing Dior's daughter, and they escaped, and bearing with them the Silmaril they came to the mouths of Sirion. Elwing was the third child and only daughter of Dior and Nimloth of Doriath, and later the wife of Eärendil the mariner. Elwing was only a little girl, about 3 years old, when the attack on Doriath occurred, when her entire family was killed by the Fëanorians in pursuit of the Silmaril. Years passed, the Silmaril came to the hands of Elwing's husband, Eärendil, the lord of the havens of Sirion. His people considered the Silmaril to be a blessing for their houses and ships. When the sons of Fëanor learned where Elwing had escaped to, they sent messages to the havens of friendship and yet of stern demand. But Elwing and the people of Sirion would not yield the jewel which Beren had won and Luthien had worn, and for which Dior the Fair was slain, and least of all while Eärendil their lord was on the sea. And so there came to pass the last and cruelest of the slayings of elf by elf, and that was the third of the great wrongs achieved by the accursed oath. For the sons of Fëanor that yet lived came down suddenly upon the exiles of Gondolin and the remnant of Doriath, and destroyed them. In that battle some of their people stood aside, and some few rebelled and were slain upon the other part, aiding Elwing against their own lords. Even among the Fëanorians the horror of attacking their own kin had become too much for some to bear. Maedhros and Maglor had the victory, but both Amrod and Amrus were slain. Only 2 of Fëanor's sons now remained alive. Elwing, with the Silmaril upon her breast, cast herself into the sea. The sons of Eärendil and Elwing, Elros and Elrond, were captured by the 2 brothers, but Maglor grew to love them and fostered them. Ulmo bore up Elwing out of the waves, and he gave her the likeness of a great white bird. And upon her breast there shone as a star the Silmaril, as she flew over the water to seek Eärendil her beloved. On a time of night, Eärendil at the helm of his ship saw her come towards him, as a white cloud exceeding swift beneath the moon, as a star over the sea moving in strange courses. She fell from the air upon the timbers of Vingilo in a swoon, and Eärendil took her to his bosom. But in the morning, with marveling eyes, he beheld his wife in her own form beside him. Hearing of the tragedy at the havens of Sirion, and fearing for their sons, Eärendil and Elwing resolved to seek the aid of the Vala. Using the Silmaril brought by Elwing, he was able to navigate through the enchanted isles and darkness defending the blessed realm, until at last he came to the coasts of Amma. With the Silmaril bound to his brow, Eärendil, Elwing, and his 3 loyal mariners sailed into the west, past the enchantments of Valinor, and he set foot first of all mortal men upon the western shores. His companions he bade to stay behind, preferring to bear alone the wrath of the Vala. Upon making landfall, Eärendil left his wife and crew behind, and made his way through Armen, and eventually reached Tirion, which he found empty, for there was a festival going on elsewhere in Valinor. Despairing, he began to return to his ship, when he was stopped by a loud voice. Eärnwe, herald of Manwë. Eärnwe greeted him, and bid Eärendil come to the Ring of Doom, and make his case before the powers. He did so, telling the Vala of the travails of elves and men, and begging their pardon. The Vala deliberated on Eärendil's fate. Because both Eärendil and Elwing were half-elven, they were given a choice: to be reckoned as elves and gain immortality, or to be reckoned as men and receive the gift of Ilúvatar, though with a longer lifespan than other men. Eärendil told Elwing to choose for both of them, and she chose to be with the elves, but Eärendil's heart lay rather with men. Nevertheless, he accepted the choice made for love's sake. Eärendil's ship Vingilot was taken and hallowed and filled with light. Eärendil was placed at its helm, with the Silmaril at his brow, to journey through the sky as a star. When Eärendil arose in the sky, the people of Middle-earth were given new hope. They called the star Gil Estel, the Star of Hope. Maedhros wondered if the star was a Silmaril. Maglor replied that if it is a Silmaril, this is good news, because that means it is finally safe from all evil. Elwing remains in Valinor, where a tower is built for her. She learns to fly from the birds who visit it. Eärendil sails through the void, but returns to Valinor periodically, and Elwing flies up to meet him. The Silmaril that had caused so much bloodshed, that had driven the Noldor to rebellion and kinslaying, that had seen the deaths of Finwë, Thingol, Dior, and countless others, this Silmaril now shone as a beacon of hope in the heavens, a reminder that even from great evil, good could ultimately come. At last, the host of the Vala prepared for their final battle against Morgoth. The Vanya and the Noldor, who had remained in Valinor with Finarfin, marched with the Vala, riding in the ships of the Falmeri. The Teleri brought the army to the other shore, but did not step foot off their ships. They would transport the host of the Vala, but would not themselves fight. Still mindful of the kinslaying at their havens so many ages before, yet they listened to the pleas of Elwing, who through Dior was of their blood, and sent mariners enough to sail into the east. The War of Wrath was the greatest and most destructive conflict Middle-earth had ever seen. The world had changed greatly, for the fury of both sides in the war had wreaked havoc on much of the land. The northern areas were torn asunder, rivers formed or destroyed, mountains and hills changed. Most of the land west of the arid Luin sank beneath the waves, and Beleriand was destroyed. Morgoth was bound with the chain Angaina, and the Silmarils taken by Eönwë, and his iron crown beaten into a collar for his neck. The Valar thrust him through the door of night, beyond the walls of the world, into the timeless void. Eönwë, the herald of Manwë, summoned all the elves of Beleriand to depart Middle-earth and go to Valinor. But Maedhros and Maglor, the last surviving sons of Fëanor, did not answer the summons. The oath still tormented them. Maedhros and Maglor sent word to Eönwë to yield the Silmarils to them, but they received the reply that their ruthless deeds had nullified their claim, and the Silmarils must go into the west. Maglor, being wearied and saddened, wished to answer Eönwë's summons and stand judgment before the Valar, but he was persuaded by Maedhros. Despite everything they had done, despite all the deaths and the centuries of suffering, Maedhros could not let go of the oath. The two sons of Fëanor stole the jewels from Eönwë's camp, but the Silmarils burnt their hands. The jewels that their father had made, the treasures they had pursued across centuries, the objects for which they had killed their own kin, these same Silmarils now rejected them. Because of the crimes they had committed in order to reclaim the jewels, they were now unworthy of them, and the Silmarils burned their hands in refusal of their rights of possession. Varda's hallowing had made the Silmarils judges, and they pronounced the sons of Fëanor guilty. So great was the pain that Maedhros cast himself and the Silmaril into a fiery chasm. Maglor also could not bear the pain of his Silmaril, but his he cast into the depths of the sea, and he wandered ever after upon the shores of Middle-earth, singing in lament. Thus ended the long and terrible saga of the Silmarils. Of the three jewels that Fëanor had made in the years of the trees, one was borne by Eärendil and set as a star in the heavens, where it shines still as the morning star, the hope of all who dwell in Middle-earth. One was cast into a fiery chasm of the earth by Maedhros and lies hidden in the depths of the world. One was cast into the sea by Maglor and rests in the unfathomable depths of the ocean. The three Silmarils, which together contained all the remaining light of the Two Trees of Valinor, were thus distributed to the three realms of Arda, the airs above, the earth, and the waters. Never again would they be united, and never again would anyone be able to gaze upon all three together as the Elder once did in the blessed days of Valinor. The Silmarils were more than just jewels. They were physical embodiments of light itself. Not metaphorical light, but the actual luminescence of the two trees that had illuminated Valinor before the sun and moon were made. In this sense, they were archives of a lost age, the only remaining containers of the original light of creation. But the Silmarils were also tainted by arrogance and lust by anyone who desired them, starting with Morgoth, then Fëanor. The jewels themselves were innocent. They were beautiful creations that contained holy light, but they became cursed objects because of what people did in pursuit of them. The oath of Fëanor proclaimed resulted in evil ends, such as the fall of the Noldor, the doom of Mandos, kinslayings, and the destruction of Doriath. Each person who possessed a Silmaril took upon themselves a unique position and responsibility, similar to the ring-bearers in the Lord of the Rings rings, and also shared the danger of falling under the spell of a magical artifact. Fëanor's achievement in creating the Silmarils was genuine. Even the Valar, including Oll, the master in hand skills indeed, could not copy them. They represented the pinnacle of what an incarnate being could achieve through craft and will, taking the work of the Valar themselves, the light of the trees, and transforming it into something new and in some ways more perfect. Yet, this very achievement became Fëanor's downfall. His love for the Silmarils began as a craftsman's natural pride in his greatest work, but it transformed into possessive obsession. He came to prize the Silmarils above all else, and increasingly ignored the fact that the light which lay in the gems and gave them their beauty was not of his own making. This is the central tragedy. Fëanor created something of surpassing beauty, but he could not let it go. When the Valar asked him to give up the Silmarils to restore the trees, his refusal seemed to spring from his own wounded pride and possessiveness. Yet by the time they asked, it was already too late. Morgoth had stolen them and murdered Finwë. The Silmarils themselves were not evil. They remained holy throughout their history, burning the hands of those who touched them with evil intent. Yet they became instruments of evil because they were so desirable, so beautiful, so unique, that they drove even good people to commit terrible acts. Thingol's demand that Beren bring him a Silmaril was born of prejudice and the desire to be rid of a mortal suitor for his daughter. This set in motion Beron's quest, which succeeded but cost Finrod his life and led to the hunting of the wolf. Dior's refusal to return the Silmaril to the sons of Fëanor was understandable. It had been won by his father at great cost, and the Fëanorians had already committed kinslaying in pursuit of the jewels. But his refusal led to the destruction of Doriath and his own death. Elwing's similar refusal led to the third kinslaying and the destruction of the havens of Sirion. Yet her choice also brought the Silmaril to Eärendil, who used it to navigate to Valinor and bring salvation to Middle-earth. The Oath of Fëanor is crucial to understanding the tragedy of the Silmarils. The oath was absolute and terrible, binding Fëanor and his sons to pursue the Silmarils to the ends of the earth and to wage war against anyone who kept them. The oath commanded Fëanor and his sons to press to Middle-earth, in the process committing atrocities against their fellow elves. Each kinslaying was worse than the last, and each time the Fëanorians failed to reclaim the jewels they sought. By the end, only Maedhros and Maglor remained, and they were tormented by their oath. Maglor wanted to surrender and face judgment, but Maedhros persuaded him to make one final attempt. When they finally held the Silmarils, the jewels rejected them, burning their hands because of the evil they had committed. The terrible irony was complete. The Silmarils that Fëanor had made and his sons had pursued for centuries were forever denied to them. The oath that had driven them to murder their kin and destroy kingdoms proved hollow in the end. They had sacrificed everything for treasures they could never possess. From a purely technical standpoint, the creation of the Silmarils represented achievements that seem almost miraculous. Fëanor devised Silima, a crystalline substance harder than diamond, yet capable of containing and preserving light, not reflecting it like a mirror or refracting it like a prism, but actually holding it internally, keeping it alive and radiant. This required deep understanding of matter at a fundamental level. Fëanor essentially designed a crystal structure that couldn't occur naturally, then figured out how to create it. But beyond the technical mastery, the Silmarils required spiritual power. The Elder possessed what Tolkien called sub-creative ability, the power to make things that were genuinely new, not just copies of what already existed. Fëanor poured part of his own spirit into the Silmarils. They contained not just the light of the trees, but something of his own fire, his own essence. This made them literally irreplaceable. Once made, they could never be made again, even by their creator. Even the Valar, including Ole, the master craftsman, could not copy them. The Silmarils demonstrate a recurring theme in Tolkien's work. Beautiful things can become instruments of corruption, not through any evil in themselves, but through the desire they inspire. The One Ring was forged with evil intent and contained Sauron's malice. But the Silmarils were created in love and contained holy light, yet they still brought ruin. Every major holder of a Silmaril suffered for it. Morgoth wore them in agony, his hands burned black forever. Thingol's demand for one led indirectly to his death. Dior was slain defending his Silmaril. The havens of Sirion were destroyed in pursuit of Elwing's jewel, and the sons of Fëanor, who had the strongest claim to the gems, were ultimately destroyed by their pursuit of them. The hallowing by Vada meant the Silmarils became moral judges. They would burn those who touched them with evil intent or blood-stained hands. This included, tragically, the sons of Fëanor themselves. The jewels their father made rejected them because of the kinslayings they had committed in pursuit of those same jewels. It was a perfect circle of doom. The tragedy of the Silmarils raises profound questions about creativity, ownership, and letting go. Fëanor created something of genuine worth and beauty. His pride in his achievement was justified. The Silmarils were objectively the greatest works ever made by one of the Eldar. But his inability to conceive of parting with them, even to restore the trees and heal Valinor, revealed the dark side of creative pride. There's a tension in Tolkien's work between the value of creation and the danger of possessiveness. The elves are meant to be sub-creators, making new beauty in response to the beauty Ilúvatar created. But when they become too attached to their creations, when they prize what they've made above all else, it leads to corruption and loss. Fëanor's relationship with the Silmarils parallels, in some ways, Tolkien's own relationship with his invented world. He spent decades creating and refining Middle-earth, pouring himself into it. The difference is that Tolkien ultimately shared his creation with the world, publishing his works for others to enjoy, though not without reluctance and difficulty. According to Christopher Tolkien, the Dagor Dagoreth, as a prophecy of Mandos, was abandoned by Tolkien. However, it remains an important part of understanding the ultimate fate of the Silmarils in Tolkien's earlier conceptions of his mythology. The Dagor Dagoreth, Sindarin, Battle of All Battles, otherwise known as the Last Battle or the War, is a battle or a war taking place at the end of Arda, described and alluded to in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Though Christopher Tolkien removed the prophecy from the Silmarillion based on a 1958 version of the Vala Quenta, wherein his father wrote that none of Mandos's dooms had declared whether the marring of Arda would ever be repaired, references to this final battle still appear throughout Tolkien's works. In the 1937 manuscript of the Quenta Silmarillion, it ends with an additional prophecy by Mandos to the Vala, which was not included in the final publication by Christopher Tolkien. This prophecy, known as the Second Prophecy of Mandos, outlined what would happen at the end of days. According to this prophecy, when the world is old and the powers have grown weary, Morgoth, the black foe of the world, seeing that the guard sleepeth, shall come back through the door of the night out of the timeless void, and all shall be darkness, for the sun he will turn to black, and the moon will no longer shed his light. But the host of Valinor shall descend upon him as a searing flame, white and terrible. One of the most striking elements of the prophecy concerns Turin Turambar, the tragic hero of the children of Húrin. Turin's black sword will slay Morgoth to his eternal end, which will deliver justice to the children of Húrin and all men who perished. This would represent the ultimate vindication of Turin, whose life was marked by terrible sorrow and the curse of Morgoth. The idea that Turin, who suffered so terribly under Morgoth's malice, would be the one to deliver the final death blow to the Dark Lord is profoundly fitting. It speaks to Tolkien's themes of eucatastrophe, the sudden happy turn in a story that pierces you with joy. Perhaps most relevant to our discussion, the prophecy included the fate of the Silmarils. Fëanor will retrieve the Silmarils from the earth, sky, and sea, and he would offer them graciously. Yavanna shall revive the two trees, and a great light will appear. The mountains in Valinor will lie down, and the light will reach every corner of the world. This represents the final redemption of Fëanor and his works. The Silmarils, scattered to the three realms of Arda, would be recovered. But crucially, Fëanor would willingly give them up, something he refused to do in life. They would be broken, and their light used to rekindle the two trees of Valinor. The Silmarils emerge from the earth, sky, and sea, and Fëanor captures them. They shatter, releasing their blaze, which Yavanna wields to reawaken the two trees. An incredible brilliance arises, and the Pelori Mountains transform into plains. The light of the trees, which had been destroyed by Morgoth in the First Age and preserved only in the Silmarils, would once again illuminate all of Arda. After the battle, the second music of Ainur by elves, men, and the Ainur will sing a new world into existence. This connects to the Ainulin Dale, the music of the Ainur that originally created Arda. The second music would be greater than the first, creating a world free from the corruption that Melkor had introduced into the original creation. In this new world, the light will replenish the youth of the Vala, the elves will rise, and all who fell shall be alive again. All the suffering, all the deaths, all the tragedies that had occurred throughout the ages would be healed and redeemed. Tolkien wrote that the Legendarium ends with a vision of the end of the world, its breaking and remaking, and the recovery of the Silmarilli and the light before the sun. So why did Christopher Tolkien remove this from the published Silmarillion? The issue was one of consistency and development in Tolkien's thought. The published Silmarillion contradicts the second prophecy in places, whereas the second prophecy explicitly states that the elves and Vala shall be renewed after Dagor Dagoreth and that the fate of men is unknown. The Silmarillion states that men will participate in singing the second music, and that it is the fate of the elves that is unknown. Tolkien's views on the ultimate fate of elves and men evolved over the decades he worked on his Legendarium. In his later writings, he seemed less certain about providing definitive answers to these questions, preferring to leave some mysteries unsolved. Whether or not the Dagor Dagoreth is considered canonical, its existence in Tolkien's earlier writings tells us something important about how he conceived of the Silmarils. They weren't merely plot devices or objects that caused conflict in the First Age. They were cosmologically significant, vessels that preserved the original light of creation, destined to play a role in the ultimate healing and remaking of the world. The fact that Fëanor, in the prophecy, willingly gives up the Silmarils to restore the trees represents his ultimate redemption. In life, his refusal to part with them set in motion the long chain of tragedies. In death and resurrection, he would finally let go, allowing his greatest creations to fulfill their true purpose, not to be possessed by anyone, but to restore the light that had been lost. Tolkien, in his essay on fairy stories, developed the concept of subcreation, the idea that human creativity is a reflection of divine creativity, that we make new things because we are made in the image of a creator. The Silmarils represent the highest achievement of subcreation by one of the Eldar, taking divine work, the light of the trees, and transforming it into something new. But the Silmarils also demonstrate the dangers inherent in subcreation. When the creator becomes too attached to the creation, when possession becomes more important than sharing or letting go, the creative act becomes corrupted. Fëanor loved his Silmarils too much, too possessively. He couldn't bear the thought of anyone else having them, not even the Valar for the purpose of healing Valinor. This mirrors concerns Tolkien had about his own sub-creative work. He was notoriously reluctant to publish, constantly revising, never quite satisfied. He worried about releasing his beloved world to readers who might misunderstand or misuse it. Yet he also knew that keeping it to himself defeated the purpose of creation. The Silmarils help illustrate Tolkien's conception of evil. In his legendarium, evil cannot create, it can only corrupt and destroy. Melkor/Morgoth was the mightiest of the Ainur, but he could never make anything truly new. He could only twist and pervert what Ilúvatar and the other Valar had made. His desire for the Silmarils stemmed from this fundamental lack. They represented light, beauty, and genuine creation, everything he was not and could not be. By stealing them and setting them in his crown, he thought he could possess these qualities, but they burned him, a constant reminder of his inability to create, only to destroy. The Oath of Fëanor demonstrates how evil spreads through otherwise good people. The sons of Fëanor weren't inherently evil. They loved their father. They wanted to right a terrible wrong, the theft of the Silmarils and murder of Finwë, and they felt bound by their oath. But the oath drove them to commit increasingly terrible acts. Kinslaying, the destruction of Doriath, the attack on the havens of Sirion. By the end, Maedhros and Maglor knew they had become monsters. When they finally held the Silmarils, the jewels themselves judged them unworthy. The tragedy is complete. They sacrificed everything for treasures they could never possess, driven by an oath they should never have sworn. The Silmarils are, at their core, about light and its preservation. In Tolkien's cosmology, light is not merely illumination, but a spiritual reality. The light of the Two Trees was the primordial light of Arda, preceding even the sun and moon. It represented purity, beauty, and divine presence. When Morgoth and Ungoliant destroyed the trees, they plunged Valinor into darkness. Not just physical darkness, but a spiritual shadow. The Silmarils became the only remaining vessels of that original light. This made them infinitely precious, but also infinitely dangerous, because everyone who desired power also desired to possess that light. The placement of Eärendil's Silmaril in the heavens as a star is deeply symbolic. The light that had caused so much bloodshed, that had driven elves to kill their own kin, that had led to wars and the destruction of kingdoms. This same light became a beacon of hope for all who dwelt in Middle-earth. Evil's attempt to possess and corrupt the light ultimately failed. The light endured and gave hope. The Silmarils are also about memory and the pain of loss. They preserved something that could not last, the light of the trees, which existed in a particular time and place that could never be recovered. In this sense, they're like photographs or recordings, capturing a moment that has passed. Fëanor created the Silmarils because he foresaw, perhaps unconsciously, that the light of the trees wouldn't last forever. He wanted to preserve it, to hold on to it permanently. This desire to capture and preserve beauty against the ravages of time is deeply human, or in this case, deeply elvish. But the Silmarils also demonstrate that some things cannot be held onto, cannot be preserved without cost. The attempt to keep the light of the trees led to the trees' destruction and the scattering of the Silmarils. Sometimes letting go is necessary, even of things we love most. It's worth noting the parallels and contrasts between the Silmarils and the One Ring. Both are objects of immense power that corrupt those who desire them. Both drive their pursuers to commit terrible acts. Both burn or reject those who are unworthy to bear them, but the crucial difference is in their nature and origin. The One Ring was forged with evil intent, containing Sauron's malice and his will to dominate. The Silmarils were created in love and wonder, containing holy light. The ring corrupts anyone who possesses it. The Silmarils corrupt those who desire to possess them, but they themselves remain pure. This distinction is important to Tolkien's moral vision. Evil lies not in objects, but in hearts and wills. The Silmarils were good and beautiful. The evil came from Morgoth's theft, from Fëanor's possessive pride, from the oath that valued treasure above all else. The Silmarils, despite being less well known to general audiences than the One Ring, are central to Tolkien's entire mythos. They give the Silmarillion its name and drive much of its narrative. They represent Tolkien's deepest themes about creation, loss, and redemption. For readers who delve into the Silmarils often become as iconic as the Ring. They represent something more fundamental to Tolkien's world, not a tool of domination, but vessels of primordial light, symbols of both the heights of achievement and the depths of tragedy that pride and possessiveness can bring. The story of the Silmarils presents significant challenges for adaptation. Unlike The Lord of the Rings, which follows a relatively straightforward quest narrative, The tale of the Silmarils spans thousands of years and involves dozens of characters and storylines. The jewels themselves don't dominate every scene, rather they cast a shadow over the entire First Age, driving events even when they're off-screen. Recent adaptations of Tolkien's work have had to navigate these challenges. The complexity of the rights situation means that direct adaptation of the Silmarillion remains difficult. References to the Silmarils in other adaptations must be carefully handled to respect both the source material and the limitations of what can be depicted. The concept of the Silmarils has influenced fantasy literature beyond Tolkien's own works. The idea of an object of great beauty and power that drives conflict across ages, that multiple factions pursue, that brings both glory and doom. This has become a common motif in fantasy fiction, but few later works have captured the tragic complexity of Tolkien's treatment. The Silmarils aren't simply MacGuffins that everyone wants. They're symbols of deeper themes about creativity, possessiveness, the nature of beauty, and the cost of obsession. Their story asks profound questions. What does it mean to create something of genuine worth? How do we balance pride in our achievements with the willingness to let go? When does love become possession, and possession become destruction? The final resting places of the three Silmarils carry deep symbolic weight. One shines in the heavens, borne by Eärendil, giving hope to all who see it. One lies in the depths of the earth, hidden in darkness and fire. One rests in the unfathomable depths of the ocean. Sky, earth, and sea, the three realms of Arda, each hold one Silmaril. The light of the two trees, which once illuminated only the Blessed Realm, has been distributed throughout the world. Even scattered and separated, even lost to most eyes, the light endures. There's hope in this dispersal. The Silmarils weren't destroyed when Maedhros and Maglor cast them away. They still exist, still contain their precious light, waiting perhaps for the end of days when they might be recovered and the trees rekindled. The light that Fëanor captured and preserved, despite all the sorrow it caused, survives. The creation and fate of the Silmarils reveal much about Tolkien's worldview. He believed deeply in the value of subcreation, in making new beauty as a response to the beauty of creation itself. But he also understood the dangers of creative pride, of loving your work so much that you cannot share it or let it go. He saw beauty as objective and real, not merely subjective. The Silmarils weren't beautiful just because people found them attractive. They were beautiful because they contained actual light, the light of divine creation. Yet he also understood that even the most beautiful things could become cursed through the evil actions people committed in pursuit of them. Most fundamentally, Tolkien believed in hope and redemption. The story of the Silmarils is tragic, full of death, betrayal, and loss. But it ends with one Silmaril shining as a star of hope, and with the prophecy, even if later abandoned, that all three would eventually be recovered and used to heal the world. Even from the greatest evil and sorrow, good could ultimately come. Why do the Silmarils continue to fascinate readers decades after Tolkien's death? Perhaps because they speak to universal human experiences. We all create things: art, relationships, careers, families. We pour ourselves into these creations, and naturally we become attached to them. The challenge is learning when to hold on and when to let go, when pride in achievement becomes destructive possessiveness. We all know the pain of loss, of seeing beautiful things destroyed or scattered. The Silmarils remind us that even when beauty seems lost, even when light appears to be extinguished, it may endure in unexpected ways. The light that once illuminated the two trees now shines as a star, giving hope across the ages. The making of the Silmarils was Fëanor's greatest achievement and his greatest curse. He created objects of unsurpassed beauty, capturing the primordial light of Valinor in crystalline form. In doing so, he demonstrated the heights to which incarnate beings could aspire, rivaling even the works of the Valar themselves. But his inability to let go of his creations, his possessive love that would not share or sacrifice, set in motion tragedies that would echo through ages. The oath he and his sons swore led to kinslaying, to the destruction of kingdoms, to deaths beyond counting. The pursuit of the Silmarils corrupted good people and gave Morgoth leverage he could never have gained otherwise. Yet the Silmarils themselves remained holy. They judged the unworthy, burned the evil, and ultimately brought hope. One shines still in the heavens, a reminder that even from great sorrow, beauty and hope can emerge. The light Fëanor captured and preserved, despite all the suffering it caused, was worth preserving. The light endures. That, perhaps, is the ultimate message of the Silmarils. Beauty is worth creating, light is worth preserving, even at great cost. But we must hold these things with open hands, ready to share them, ready even to sacrifice them if necessary for the greater good. The tragedy of Fëanor is that he learned this lesson too late, Or perhaps if we believe the prophecy that he will learn it at last when he returns from the halls of awaiting and willingly breaks the Silmarils to restore the light of the world. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the lore of the Silmarils. These three jewels are so much more than plot devices or treasures to be won. They're central to understanding Tolkien's entire mythology, his themes, his moral vision, and his understanding of creativity, beauty, and loss. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into Tolkien's legendarium. And let me know in the comments, if you could possess one of the Silmarils, would you? Or have we learned from Fëanor's mistakes? Until next time, may your own creations bring light to the world, and may you hold them with wisdom and open hands.